Hey,
Hey, Mac. I was having trouble. I was having trouble getting in. Hi, Francie.
Hi.
Francie, how are you?
Great. How's everybody's spring break?
Very good. Very nice. Good to see you.
It's you too. It's a nice way to come back.
Oh,
this
yeah,
session.
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Harrington.
Hi, how are you?
All right.
Just call me Kit.
Should I
Kent?
announce you as Kit then when I announce you?
Yes,
Okay.
or Harrington Kit Crissey.
Harrington Kit Crissey. Okay.
How about Professor Kit? More formal, you know.
That sounds like Dr. Oz. How are you, Mac? How are you,
Oh.
Francie?
Good. How are you?
Fine, thanks.
I'll have to give you my Gmail, Mac, because
Okay.
I don't want to miss your notifications when I retire.
Don't say that.
But it was great to get your reminder because I completely forgot about this.
Sure.
Oh, Mac, are we going to have them on Friday nights again after this or what?
No.
Oh, we're going to only have them on Saturdays. Oh, okay.
And is it the first or the second Saturday?
It's the second Saturday.
Oh, of every month? Oh, okay.
And
'cause I
you're
didn't know
coming, and you're coming very soon as a presenter, aren't you, Francie?
Yes, unfortunately, the second Saturday of April, I'll be away, so darn. But
We
I
can
was
do
hoping
something.
that, yeah, go ahead.
I said we can do something. We want to. Are you not a presenter in one of the Saturdays?
Yeah, in June.
Yeah.
So maybe in April, I can join from my phone from the hotel. Maybe I can do that. Or maybe I'll bring my computer and then just go to my hotel room for that time period. Yeah, because that'll be fun. So that's a second Saturday of every month.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Francie, I'm really looking forward to yours. I selected your proposal.
Thank you. Thank you for selecting it.
But I'm going to have to watch the recording because I won't be able to be there live. But you bet I'm going to watch it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And any ideas would be helpful because it's just like evolving, you know? So, and I'm learning as I go. So any ideas or resources, please let me know. Yeah.
We really look forward to it.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry I'm not on video. I look awful.
Oh,
Oh no.
Yeah,
I
I was
don't believe
wondering
that.
what happened, Bill.
Yeah.
well, your picture looks nice. So
Yes.
The picture certainly looks much nicer than I do at this moment. So
and to me, you look like a baby. Like
well, the
anyone
picture's
that-
not 4 years old, so I have aged since then.
So Francie, is this your last term?
yeah, this is my last semester.
As
And
a, okay.
March is kind of significant because they said, if you want to change your mind, you can write us by March 15th. So I'm like, oh, after that, you know, you just.
You look great, Francie. I'm telling you, you look great. You should consider it.
Oh, well, you know, I want to be able to have energy to do these nonprofit projects.
Yes.
And I don't want to just like some, you know, CCP has this, I don't know what you would call it, folklore, a tale that you go out with a tag on your toe, that it's kind of a crude way of saying the obvious, right?
Yeah.
So, but with the elimination of halftime, people are retiring earlier.
Yeah.
I would do halftime if I could.
Leslie, 10 o'clock.
Oh, 10 o'clock.
Oh, it's 10 o'clock. Okay.
You keep
Hello,
you on the
everybody. You have
Well,
to
we're
remind me of the
recording this.
times.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I want to introduce our speaker today, Harrington Kit Crissey. He's been teaching ESL to adults since 1974, and this is when he got his master's degree in TESOL from Temple. He taught in intensive English programs at Temple, the Nationality Center, Arcadia, and St. Joseph's University before retiring from full-time work in 2013. He now teaches a few hours a week at the New Age Adult Day Care Center for elderly Russian immigrants, and also the mainline school night. He's been a board member at the Penn TESOL East for the past 25 years or so. Okay, Kit, you got the floor.
All right, thank you. It's a pleasure to have been asked to talk this morning. And I hope that what I have to say will prove to be a little bit interesting at any rate. But I'd like to start off by mentioning three factors that led me consciously or unconsciously to be an ESL teacher. The first is that right from the time I was a little boy, I was good at remembering people's names, places, and dates. And I took an interest in geography and history. And not only in the US, but also in foreign countries as well. And I'd like to say how that related to something I later did in the classroom. I was teaching at English Language Services at St. Joseph's University. And I was using the set of books published by Cambridge. They were graded textbooks. I forget what the title was of the series, but in one of the lessons, they talked about having a trivia contest among the students. And that gave me an idea, and I developed something called World Trivia. And here's how the game worked. It was me against the entire class. The students had to ask me questions about their country, and I had to ask them questions about their country. There were no questions asked about the United States. So I was at a disadvantage. If you got an answer to a question correctly, if you got it correct, you got a point. If you didn't answer correctly, if you didn't know the answer, nothing happened. And of course, when you asked a question, you had to know the answer to the question. Now, you would have thought that I would have lost probably 95% of the time because no questions were asked about the United States. But the questions, of course, had to be asked in English, and that may have influenced the fact that students couldn't ask very sophisticated questions, especially at lower levels. So it turned out that I won about half the time. Right, the second thing that influenced me was the fact that I majored in classical languages in college, Latin and Greek. And this came in handy when I became an ESL teacher, in that I was able to explain word roots from words that were derived from Greek and Latin in English. That helped with vocabulary study. The third thing was that I spent 3 years on active duty with the Navy after I graduated from college. And in the final year, I did a lot of great travel in the Pacific. I had never been out of the United States. In fact, I had never been west of Chicago before that final year. And suddenly I found myself homeported on a ship on Guam. And during that year, I saw the islands of Micronesia. That would be the Western Carolines, the Central Carolines, the Eastern Carolines, including Bikini and the Marshalls. And I also saw the Mariana Islands, of course. And I'm talking about bare-breasted women in grass skirts, men in loincloths, outrigger canoes, and as little as 20 people, as few as 20 people on an island. So that was an experience that money couldn't buy. Then the ship went to Pearl Harbor. So I got to see Oahu Island, Hawaii, and also Honolulu. And then later, Japan and Hong Kong. Now, how did this influence my decision to become an ESL teacher? Well, it whetted my appetite for foreign cultures and people. And after I got out of the Navy, I had fallen in love with San Francisco and moved out there for a while. But then I got the wanderlust again, and I got on a ship with no job and about $150 in my pocket, and I headed for Japan. In other words, I took a ship from San Francisco to Yokohama. And while I was on the voyage, I got lucky. I met a man who knew that Matsushita Denki, that's the Matsushita Electric Company, which we know as Panasonic in the US, was hiring English teachers to teach its factory workers. And all you had to be was a college graduate who spoke native English, or if you were not from the United States or England, spoke very good English. So I said, gee, this is interesting. So when I got to Yokohama, I called the number I had been given, called an office in Osaka, and it turned out that a job had just become available in the Kyoto, Osaka, Nara area. That's called Kansai in Japan. And it turned out that a man from Switzerland who was teaching in the program had fallen in love with a Japanese woman. Apparently her family was not that interested in her marrying a foreigner. So he spirited her off to Switzerland and I took his place. So I spent the next 7 months teaching English to the Panasonic factory workers, and I was able to save $1,300 by living cheaply. And then I took a 12-country, 40-day trip around the Pacific. And I arrived back in San Francisco, and I decided that I was not really a West Coast person. I wanted to move back to my East Coast roots. So I moved back to Philadelphia and eventually decided to pursue ESL. I explored going to Penn or going to Temple, and I chose Temple because their tuition was less than Penn, because I was a Pennsylvania resident, and Temple, being a Pennsylvania subsidized school, charged less tuition for Pennsylvania residents. And I was able to pay for my tuition on the GI Bill. I had spent 36 months on active duty, and I had 36 months of benefits coming. The other thing I'd like to do is talk about various programs that were popular, various methods of teaching English and learning English when I was in graduate school. And soon after I started my career teaching English. I got a master's degree in TESOL from Temple. I started in 1972 and finished in 1974. One of the methods that was popular at that time was called community language learning, which had been developed by a Jesuit priest named Father Curran. And it involved class participation. For instance, the teacher would throw out a subject like your house or your home, and the students would get in pairs and talk about their homes. And then after the discussion was over, the teacher would ask for a couple of vocabulary words that each student had used in the discussion. And they would be generated and put on the board. And then the teacher would go over the pronunciation and meanings of the words. And then a discussion would ensue. Another method was called the silent way, and that was developed by a man named Caleb Gattegno, and it involved using various wooden rods of differing colors. Another method that I thought very highly of, although I did not use it extensively, was Total Physical Response by James Asher. And in that method, you learned a language the way you learned your native language when you were an infant. The teacher would give commands, never more than 3 at a time, otherwise that would be sensory overload. The teacher would repeat them several times, and then the students would act them out. For instance, I was taught the method in Japanese. For instance, tatte kudasai means stand up, please, and suwatte kudasai means sit down, please. So I would do those. Then the teacher would say, tatte kudasai, stand up. Aruite kudasai, walk, please. Tomatte kudasai, stop, please. So here we have stand up, sit down. Those are 2 elements. We had walk and stop, just 2 elements. And I found that very effective. I think it's a good way to get started with people who know no English at all. And by the way, speaking of people who know no English at all, I was afraid of teaching beginners until my second job, which was at the Nationality Service Center, 13th and Spruce Streets in Philadelphia. The US government had agreed to take many more refugees from Indochina into the US, and thus we were getting an influx of Vietnamese, Cambodian, and Laotian refugees who spoke little or no English. So I had to learn how to do it, and I did nothing but for 2.5 years. And since then, excuse me, I've had no fears about teaching beginners. Another thing that was popular at that time was the Audiolingual Method. That was a general approach using tapes. And a big proponent of that was Joan Morley at the University of Michigan. And one thing that was used in that method was called backward buildup. With backward buildup, you would give a sentence in English to the foreign student, like, I went to the store yesterday, and then say it in bits backwards and move toward the front, like yesterday. To the store yesterday. I went to the store yesterday. And that was very interesting. So anyway, these were some of the things that, and I have a frog in my throat, I'm sorry. These were some of the things that were popular when I started teaching, and I think they're still worthwhile today. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Bill.
So out of all of these methods from those times up until today, what do you think is the most effective?
Well, I never actually used any of them to any great extent, Bill, but just on the surface, I would say total physical response. Total physical response. That was very good for beginners, but the others were valid too.
Thank you. I think I need to integrate a little bit more of that. I'm going to be teaching beginners starting at the end of the month, and I haven't done it in a long
Okay.
time.
Now, you indicated that you learned French that way.
Yep. Our French teacher in high school did a lot of TPR with us, and she had some sort of gesture for almost every word we learned, even if it was a little bit abstract. And then she would put those words together and make a story, and she would use our names in the story. So if you heard your name, you had to get up and act everything out. And then afterwards, she would give us a written copy of the story that we would then answer questions about. So she, expanded on it. And it worked really well for high school students. I don't know how well it would work in college.
Well, I think Rassius at Dartmouth, the so-called Rassius method, was that sort of method that he used for teaching French.
Maybe
Have you heard of the Rassius method?
I have not.
It sounded like that's what your teacher was using with you, combined with TPR. How many of you have heard of the Rassius method? Nobody? Okay. He used to act out stories. I think he would even break eggs over students' heads to keep them involved. That's something I would do too. I'd think outside the box and sometimes act things out, including getting on the floor, literally getting on the floor to show the difference between wake up, sit up, and get up. All right, I'll open it up to questions from here on in. Ask me questions and I'll be happy to answer them. Or please just comment on what I've said already.
Hi, Kat. I really like how you used all these different methods over the years, and also seeing how teaching English has changed and developed all over the years. I find it really very, very interesting. And now looking back, how students learned English and how we teach English. And I think it's a good idea for me as a teacher to try a little bit of each kind of method, although they are a bit from earlier years. But I remember when I first started teaching back in the early 80s, we used one of the books, the textbooks we used was the substitution drills and repetition and a lot of grammar and not much of a communicative approach to language, and how this has changed a lot. So basically, I really like how you were able to live all of these and to experience, to use all of these over the years in teaching, and how the English language teaching has changed, and that the way you were describing it, I find it really very, very interesting. Thank you for that. Also, traveling around the world, how that led you to teaching English as well. So you were able to see firsthand experience where students live in their countries, like the countries where students live, and how when they come to this country, how they are focused on learning English and how we help them as teachers.
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention is that by teaching in Japan, I was able to save $1,300. And with that money, I took a 12-country, 40-day trip around the Pacific. That was the trip of a lifetime. Any other questions?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. I want to say Mr. Kit, but I know that's not right.
No, that's fine, Francie. I've been called worse.
That shows you my memory capacity. Yeah, what Helen was saying. So we used to be able to travel like that, you know, and the baby boomer, you know, we could just go and hardly on anything. And then I guess this is the privileged part, just teach English, you know, like, you know, so like our dominance in the world gave us this, you know, thing we could do. And for not much money, you know, all these things came together for us in this generation. And so that was really, it was nice to go down memory lane, even though I didn't get to go to all the places you went. And also with the techniques that you described, when I taught real beginner ESL, we used to have at CCP, it was called pre-level. I don't remember what the method was called. All I can remember is, this is a book, that's the door. And I think somehow that might be connected to the name. You know, this is a book, that's the door. I don't know what the name is, but I did used to teach Spanish. This was before my CCP days, and I used TPR. And being an out-of-the-box thinker, like you described, it was not, even the stuff I do now is not like, what do you call it? Correct, or whatever the box is. So, because I'm always
Orthodox.
Yes, very good. Yeah. There's a new word I'm learning, heterodox or something. So yeah, I totally, because when I went to graduate school, I took theoretical linguistics, then I would teach a class and I would try out the techniques. Like the students were my guinea pigs, right? So I did the TPR in Spanish, and I just have one story that it was so scary the first time. Whenever you do unorthodox things, even to this day, when I'm doing something unorthodox, it's very scary because the first time you do it, you know, even if there's research, if you know, your colleagues or the department, you don't know, they're going to just roll their eyes, which, by the way, they have done. So, and the Spanish department head did not approve. He belonged to MLA, and he was all very, you know, anyway, so I had the textbook there with your normal fill in the blank with the Spanish stuff. And I put the book down, and like, this was the day. I had my lesson plan, TPR, and I caved. I couldn't do, you know, it's just like froze. And I picked the book back up and went back to the drill. Then eventually I did, and they were, you know, throwing their textbooks out the window, having a great time, jumping on their textbooks, throwing them in the garbage, you know. And they loved it. They loved TPR for beginning. So thank you for those memories.
One other thing I'd like to mention is I got lucky. I graduated with a master's degree from Temple in June of '74, and in September of '74, Temple started its intensive English language program. And I learned about this from a fellow student in graduate school, and I applied, and I was one of the first 2 teachers hired for the Temple Intensive English Language Program. That's the program that Rob Shepard teaches in now. And the other teacher had actual experience. His name was Howard Sokoloff, and he had taught English for the Peace Corps in Iran. And he taught me something that I have made a cornerstone for my teaching ever since. And that is, when you're teaching grammar, explain the structure, then do mechanical drills, and then do communicative drills in that order. And I found that to be very effective. It's common sense, but I still think it has to be said. It has to be thought of. To at least explain the structure, and then, especially at intermediate and advanced levels, explain the structure, do mechanical drills out of the textbook, and then do communicative drills.
Mac, will you talk about, it was a presentation you did that was along those lines, the 4
Right.
essential. Could you remind us what those were?
Yeah, sure. But Professor Kidd, what a powerful story. I love it. And from the bottom of my heart, I'm thanking you for sharing all your motivations, your career, your traveling, and all those things, how they feed into your teaching pedagogy. Very rarely do I get an opportunity to hear such authentic stories as you have actually shared with me. So I'm really, really thankful to you that you came and
Well, thank you, Mac.
Yeah. So I just, Francie, I'll come back to those 4 sequences, but quick comment before I forget. So, Professor, there is a huge debate going on in our field in the last 20 years. Our friend, Professor Kumar, he did a book titled Post Methods around 20 years ago. And Kumar made an argument that the methods have died down. They have no relevance now. We are in an age where you can draw on any method you like, and there is no such thing as method. And he titled this Post Method. I remember his book was Post Method something. Now that, yeah, and here is your story. Someone, a teacher who has tried a number of methods and find strength in all of them. And that was my approach when the book came in. I wrote about it. I said, look, all these methods that have developed over decades have something to offer to us. We cannot kind of reject them and saying, oh no, like this conversation, like Francie shared how TPR she used, or Bill, you know, he shared in the chat how these methods were effective and how he was taught foreign language through these. So we cannot say actually, so the point I'm making is that we can't say that these methods are outdated. They are useless. All these methods have a lot to offer. One quick example I'll give you, Professor Kidd, I used to use Audiolingual Method. And as Helen pointed out, the drills and the substitution drills and how these methods, let me give you one quick example of Audiolingual Method. I have not found any other method which help learners become so fluent as to this Audiolingual Method. Reason is, in Audiolingual Method, they repeat things fast. So the mental processing, they don't need to actually process each word and combine them and speak out. No, since they practice a number of times, so they become more fluent. Now, very recent research in TESOL is saying, hey, Audiolingual Method is probably the best in helping foreign language speakers become more fluent. It's coming back. So yeah, so it's a wonderful presentation which says that Suggestopedia or silent method or TPR, these methods are effective actually. These are not outdated. I'll move on to my second point on the reflection based on your presentation, that these are not chronological. If you're thinking that this one was 1970s and communicative language teaching is 19 or 2020, I think it's a fallacy. We should not actually date them saying that, you know, because when you date them and use a time frame, you kind of imply that, all right, this was an old thing, not useful. So these are my two thoughts on your presentations. Now, Francie, this module, the thing that you were asking was basically, what is a balanced course? What is a balanced language course? Internationally acknowledged. What are the components of a balanced language course? And Kit has mentioned about it. So one part, 25% of the course has to be on language and forms, where you explicitly teach the forms. But remember, the other part should be meaningful input. So the meaning should be central. So meaningful input should be 25%, meaningful output 25%, language forms, mean formal teaching of the language, should be 25%, and fluency practice, which means fluency practice means you're not going to teach them anything new. You just give them the things to practice more. Like if you're teaching writing and you've taught them a 5-paragraph essay, so fluency writing is that they get the opportunity to write time and again, a number of times. That's called fluency. Nothing new is taught in the fluency component. So, and again, the best part of this framework given by Paul Nation in his book, the strength of this framework is that 3 components are student governed. Like students have a lot of input. Meaningful input means students decide what kind of book they want to read. Meaningful output, students actually decide what kind of things they will write after reading the book. So the teachers do not have much to say in 3 of these components. Only in the language teaching, I mean, formal teaching, language forms, that's the time when the teacher input is required. So the whole framework promotes learners' autonomy, as you will. So that's what, you know, a balanced course should be.
What about the fluency 25%?
You're not
and student choice?
Yeah, so the fluency is that the students get to decide what kind of things that they are going to practice in what ways. So teacher input should be minimum, and no new structure, nothing new. Whatever they have mastered, like if a student has mastered how to give an oral presentation, then it's not enough to give them one opportunity. They should have like 3 or 4 times in a course, 3 or 4 times then when they make an oral presentation. Just fluency, for the sake of fluency.
Are there any other questions for me? Or anything that anyone would like to say?
I just wanted to add, you know, Mac brings up how a lot of these old methods do have a place in the modern classroom. People laugh at me all the time because I have the silent way rods. And how I use them for beginners is, you know, when we're just doing basic sentence structure, subject, verb, object, I do 3 different colors. 1 for each. When we do the 3rd person S, I use the tiny little white one and I stick it on the end. And then all I have to do when they miss that S, I don't have to interrupt their speech. All I have to do is walk around with that little white cube in my hand and it reminds them. Or, you know, there's a bunch of little white cubes. I'll just stick a white cube on everybody's desk and they'll remember to do it because that visual reminder is there. And for listening and speaking classes, especially, and I'm not using the silent way. I'm very much, a proponent of task-based language teaching, and that's what I do. And that's, what all of my lessons are. But just borrowing little bits from these things and doing a little bit of TPR and having those rods as a tool, I think it is useful. And, a lot of the communicative language teaching has moved away from direct grammar teaching. And I don't do a lot of direct grammar teaching, but just the addition of the rods, it makes things more salient. And so I think applying those old methods in new ways to a task-based or communicative approach works really, really well. And so I'm glad that in grad school, I had a course that taught me the history of all of these methods, because I find little things.
Yeah, that's very good, Bill. Yeah, I think it's also good to act things out as much as possible. You can even do this with pronunciation. A lot of languages don't have the vowel sound. So what I do to keep the student's attention is to have a student come up and tell the student, punch me in the stomach. Now I say, don't do it hard, but just easy. Do it easily. And when he punches me in the stomach or she punches me in the stomach, I say, ugh, and I say, that's the sound you want. Things like this, just to keep the student's attention. Any other comments?
Kate, can you
Yeah.
say something on teaching academic literacies like reading, writing, and how these methods you use them in teaching of reading and writing?
Well, I'd like to go back to when I started teaching in 1974. Today, the major publishers have graded textbooks, and that helps a lot. Back when I started, you basically had to figure out what textbooks you were going to use, and it was a hodgepodge. But in terms of teaching literacy, I would just use one thing I do is for those who do not use the Roman alphabet, I teach cursive writing. For instance, to Arab students. Practically everybody comes with a knowledge of the printed Roman alphabet, but not the cursive Roman alphabet. Well, you may say, well, what do you need cursive for today? Well, a lot of adults still write notes in cursive, especially if they're my age. And you may see other things written in cursive, so I think it's good to know. But as far as one specific method for teaching literacy, I didn't follow any specific one, no.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the textbooks today have good ways of explaining, for instance, how to teach composition. In other words, having an introductory paragraph, body paragraphs, conclusion, having a thesis statement in the introductory paragraph, having a topic sentence for each body paragraph, and that helps the teacher a lot.
I just thought of something from Mac's question. Now we're working on a lot with the backward design is the new kind of framework that we've been using. And I noticed that it kind of goes together with way back in the day, Stephen Krashen's input plus one. Like, I was like, wow, that's so weird how something from way back in the 80s can connect with something very, very new, backward design, where you begin at the end. Have you heard of backwards design?
Well,
Oh,
that's backward buildup. That's what I mentioned.
go
yes.
ahead and explain backward buildup.
Okay, I'll give you a sentence in Japanese and I'll do it with backward buildup.
Oh, okay, yeah, I
Watashi wa
remember,
nihongo o
yeah.
hanashimasu. Hanashimasu. Nihongo o hanashimasu.
No, this is
Watashi wa
different.
nihongo
Yeah,
o hanashimasu.
yeah, I remember now you said that. That was interesting. That's very interesting for syntax. But no, this is very different. Backward design. Does anybody else know accelerated learning, backward design?
No.
Yeah, it's so the idea is it connects to Stephen Covey, who is more of a philosopher, begin with the end in mind. So you actually begin the course at the end of the course. It's and Mac is saying genre-based approach to teaching writing. Yeah, that's what you were saying before, but this is different. So you begin at the end and you teach backwards. So what you find is some things you don't have to teach, because a lot of, like if you have a mixed level class, a lot of times, you know, with ESL, people came to the United States at different times, they had different experiences, so they know different things in the same class. So, so you start at the end, this is what you want by the end of the course. And I never liked teaching to the test, but this is different and it's kind of like that, you know, it's so weird. So thanks, Mac. Anyway, so you start at the end and then you find out what they don't know, and then you work with that, and they use a lot of cognitive science. So it's called dynamic testing. Like, so then every test, it's not based on having learned something and then you test. It's backwards. So you test something, see what they don't, the test, we call it a test, just to, I don't know, scare them. You want to keep them on their toes, but test them. And then whatever they missed, that's what you teach, a formative assessment. And it's very effective. And by the time you get to the end of the course, you've already reached the end. It's not all this impetus on the end of the course and the final exam. You know, you've been doing the final exam from the beginning. So it's a fascinating approach. I'm completely sold on it lately. So enough out of me.
I'd like to say a word about Pear Work. Pear Work became very popular. Didn't Terry Pica at Penn advocate that?
Yes.
I think she did. But I think the great thing about Pear Work is that you maximize students' chances to talk. The one drawback with Pear Work I've always felt is that it can be garbage in, garbage out if students are mangling the language when talking to each other. So Mac, you and I are learning English and I say, me no speak English. And the other student picks up on it and says, me no speak English either. I mean, but I guess that's just something you have to live with. Any comments on Pear Work?
Well, as someone who knew Dr. Pica, so Dr. Pica had her, 5 frameworks for group work, and everything fit into one of 5, buckets essentially. And if you set Pear Work upright and you're monitoring well enough, I think that it works really well. I'm also a huge fan of Laschke and Blythe-Roman's framework of group and pair work, which is essential forms. So building your task so that there is a single essential form, and rather than directly teaching it, using recasting and other methods of feedback to get them where they need to go. And to build on what Francie was saying, when I took second language acquisition with Diane Larson Freeman, she told us about her book, Grammar Dimensions, and how she didn't use the word backward design, but it was essentially that every chapter starts with some sort of opening task. It may not be a written task, it might be a spoken task where the teacher is going around assessing what the students know and don't know. And she always said that the book was designed so that if they perform in that first task, that you should skip the chapter. And she said, teachers make their syllabus in the beginning. And she said, students will go in, they'll perform perfectly on those tests, and then the teacher will teach the chapter anyway because it's in the syllabus. And that drove her absolutely insane. But these two things tie together because that is the entirety of Grammar Dimensions, with those three pillars: form, meaning, and use. Creating that opening task where you see what they know and they don't know, using Pika's 5 different communicative tasks in group work. You know, Dr. Pika was Diane Larson Freeman's student, so it was inspired by Diane Larson Freeman's teaching to get them to build up to, you know, being able to use it appropriately, and to build on what Max says, as you go through the units, it focuses more and more on fluency to get them, you know, actually producing with some sort of speed. So, you know, I like to name drop Diane Larson Freeman, but I think it ties all 3 of those things together really well. And it's a good reminder to me of what my core theory in teaching is, because sometimes I stray from it, and I certainly need to be mindful of it when I develop my syllabi.
Very well said, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kate, one quick question.
Go ahead, Mac.
So there is an argument by Kelly in his work, 25 Centuries of Language Teaching. They argue that there's nothing new in language teaching, actually. It's been there for the last 25 centuries, whatever method you talk about. Your take on it?
Well, it's hard to say because I don't go back 25 centuries and I don't know exactly what was being taught.
In the last,
But one thing's
in the
for
last
sure,
5
people
decades.
learn. People have been learning foreign languages one way or the other for centuries and many centuries, and that's good. But as far as the last 5 decades, I agree with you that none of these methods that were popular back in the 60s or 70s or 80s and aren't spoken of that much now, that doesn't mean they've lost their worth. I think I still feel they're I think they're still worthy, and they're worth knowing about.
I agree. Thank you.
If we go back more than that, though, to, you know, a century ago, when English was being taught by grammar translation, I do think that that is one method that has fallen by the wayside, and rightly so. I think we know now that language teaching is all about communication. And, you know, as we moved on from grammar translation and moved into the direct method and the natural way, and that pendulum shift back and forth from, you know, accuracy focused to fluency focused, I think there's something to be said about all of them. But grammar translation, in my mind, really does none of that. And so I'm glad it has fallen apart. Some may say that it's about accuracy, but, you know, translation itself is an art. I took a Chinese translation part of a course at one point, and it almost doesn't matter how good at the language you are. Translation is this whole other thing, and it's really hard to do. So in terms of, has language teaching changed over the last 25 centuries? Yeah, I would say once we got into, you know, the direct method and started moving away from grammar translation, and people recognized that communication was important, more important than just writing something on a piece of paper, I think that's where, language teaching really accelerated. And I would be really interested in knowing people who were bilingual from learning the language rather than just exposure in, the 1800s and early 1900s. I want to know what they did, because I can't imagine that the grammar translation method got them speaking a second language.
Yeah, I agree, Bill. I've often wondered how they learned too.
But what's interesting is they did.
Yes.
So, Joseph Conrad is a great example of that. People did learn other languages back then. And my hypothesis, and this is a total hypothesis, is that some people just naturally do it right. So I know that when I was in French in high school, I felt like the class was not moving fast enough. I was really, really highly motivated. And, this was the early 2000s and the internet isn't what it is now. And I ended up finding this French language learners chat room, which had native speakers in it as well. And I sat in that chat room for hours and hours and hours a day, and went from not really being able to contribute and just being a watcher to about a year later being a major contributor. And now that I reflect on that, what I realize is I was doing communicative language teaching or communicative language learning, right? I was, trying things out, seeing what worked, seeing what didn't, and taking part in a community. And I had motivation to learn because I wanted to become friends with these people. I wanted to make connections with French folks. And so I knew nothing of CLT at the time, and I had no real learning strategies. It's just what I did. And I assumed that people back in the day were doing the same thing. They made friends and they used the language, and it works. And so I think that our more modern language teaching methods kind of mirror that. And so, I think we're just more explicit about it now, but some people might just be programmed to communicate, and it works.
So thanks, Bill. I want to go back to my first observation that all these methods have something to offer to us. And the same applies to grammar translation method. I know that grammar translation method, a lot of people say that it was a waste of time, but I see lots of benefits in that one also, especially when it comes to teaching syntax or grammar to people who come from languages where SVO is not the order, subject, verb, and object. English mostly follows SVO. It is crucially important for such speakers to learn SVO. And it's this method which gives a lot of explicit instruction to learners. I remember I learned English language through primarily a grammar translation method in the initial years, because that was the only thing available to me. Translation, because whenever I heard English word, my mind always go to its translation in my native language. So I see that a use of native language is a resource rather than is a deficit point. So if anyone who has learned any other language, like when you are learning Spanish or French and your L1 is English, somehow or the other, you kind of start translating it. So I'm a particular proponent of taking the best out of these methods and approaches, be it grammar translation or communicative language or community language learning or total physical, as Kit has explained beautifully, the silent way. So that's what I actually approach all these methods. They have something to offer, even grammar translation.
Yeah,
I find that some people, Helen, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Kit. No, go ahead, Kit.
Go ahead, Helen.
Okay, thank you. I notice, like with my students, sometimes when they learned English in their country. So I noticed that there was a lot of focus for them on being accurate. They studied a lot of grammar, they know a lot of grammar, they know the structure of the sentences and so on. But they always, when they first come to our program, they let me know that they need to practice more to be able to communicate more fluently and more easily. So I noticed, like, when I give them more practice and more work in the communicative way, I see that their language improves very quickly over a period of time, but they do make progress and they still maintain that kind of accuracy. So in addition to the accuracy and a little bit of their fluency, with more practice and speaking and listening exercises, they become like more competent, and especially the higher levels, especially when they can combine accuracy and fluency together to become more competent in their use of the language. I see those things already happening because they already have that basis of, they know the grammar well, they know, but again, they need also to, so they have good basis in their, receptive skills, but they need to be better in the productive, in the speaking and the writing. So I think the communicative method helps them further to improve their productive skills, the writing and the speaking. And once they improve those, then they are in a better position to use the language more competently and hopefully later more proficiently as they learn it further. Thank you. I'm sorry, Kit, I interrupted.
No, that's fine, Helen. Any other comments? Do you find that some people just pick up a language by listening to it? I've never been able to do that. Maybe because the first foreign language I learned was Latin, and that was only grammar translation. You didn't have to learn how to speak it, you learned how to translate it. Do you think that kind of stunted me in terms of being able to pick up a language or being open to a language just by listening to it?
I started with Latin too, and I turned out okay.
Well, and it
Well,
also
that's good,
depends. I think it depends on what situations you're in. Like if you were immersed completely in a culture and then you had to survive, then you would develop those skills. So, but like what Mac was saying about meaning in the chat, I remember one time, this is the weirdest example. I do not speak Vietnamese. I do not know how to speak Vietnamese. I mean, I know how to say goodbye. I've heard a lot of Vietnamese. I don't understand anything. But there was this Vietnamese person saying something to someone else. For some reason, I understood exactly what she was saying. So it was completely the context. And like what Mac was saying, the meaning came across, even though I didn't know Vietnamese. So I think more of those kind of situations you probably would have done very well if you were in that, scenario.
Thank you, Francie.
One
Kid?
thing I'm sorry, Mac.
No, go ahead.
One thing I hear people say a lot is, oh, I'm going to go to X country and pick up the language. I think that is silly. One of my mom's former coworkers said he was going to move to Brazil and pick up Portuguese. And she said, do you have any advice for him? I said, well, does he know Spanish or French, or has he ever taken a Romance language before? And she said, no, he just wants to go there and pick it up. And I was like, good luck him. Because this idea that people can just go and be immersed and that you're going to learn a language by osmosis, I think that is a little bit unrealistic. I think that you can.
Very limited.
Being immersed is helpful when there's instruction and intentionality alongside of it. When you're just hearing people speak all around you, that's well beyond your I+1, right? So you might pick up a few words, but oh my gosh, it's not going to work. So this guy, he quit his job, he moved to Brazil, and he was back in like 2 months. And my mom was like, oh, well, he never picked up Portuguese. And I was like, I saw that one coming. But I've heard this a lot, this idea that, you know, oh, immersion is the best way to learn a language. Well, yeah, if you're in prison, sure, because you have this external motivation to pick up a language. There was an article, I forget where it came from, but that people learn language fastest when they're in prison because you need it to survive.
That's very interesting.
But just dropping yourself in the middle of a country and just saying, oh, they have an ear for language. No, if they have an ear for language, that means that they have some sort of intentional method that they're using to make it happen. So in short, no, I don't think that anyone can just go and randomly pick up a language just from listening to it.
Well,
And
thank
Stephen
you,
Krashen-
everyone. I want to thank also Kit for his great presentation. We're going to have to
Well,
stop
thank you,
now.
Leslie. I don't know how much of a presentation it was.
It was wonderful.
Thank you anyway.
As soon, Kate, as soon as I'm off from this, I'm gonna make a telephone call and praise you more. It was fascinating. It was a great conversation. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, thanks, Mac.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks,
I enjoyed it.
everybody.
Take care.
All right.
All right,
Bye,
bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you, Kit. Thank you, everyone.